Hi everyone, and welcome to week one of our festivals and fireworks sew-along hosted by Pat Sloan at her website ilovetomakequilts.com. The original intent of this sew-along with the Fat Quarter Shop was to showcase their triangles on a roll, so the entire quilt and all of its blocks are made of half-square triangles. Pat has already shown you how to do this with the 2 at a time method, the AccuQuilt method, and a third method. And I thought, why don't I take the blocks apart and show you a completely different way to make them? There is the original intended way as per the Fat Quarter Shop sew-along with all of the half-square triangles. There is a second option, which I've put on the screen now, which we change some of those parts out for flying geese. And then there's the final version that I'll be making in this tutorial that has a square in a square, flying geese, half square triangles, and sew and flips. So it's every single one of the tools that you have for constructing blocks. So the way I also was looking at it was the half square triangle in its original form was the beginner friendly, and mine is the more advanced beginner to intermediate. So grab your fabrics, grab a beverage. This is a long one. Come with me and I'll show you how to do it. As you can see, I have all of my pieces and parts cut out as per the cutting instructions for my style of doing this block, and a link to these cutting instructions will be in the description below. We're going to start by doing the 4 corner units, and for that we just need fabrics I, C and J and 4 of our fabric D squares. We won't need any of the other fabrics, so we'll just put those to the side and then we'll move on to creating our corner units. We're going to start with fabrics I and C, and with these we need to make some half square triangles. So to make the half square triangles, we take a pencil or a marking tool of our choice and a ruler, and we mark a diagonal line in one direction on the back of our background squares. We'll then line these up right sides together with our other main fabric squares, and we'll take that to the machine and we'll stitch 1/4 of an inch on each side of our drawn line. As these squares are a little larger than we normally work with, I just like to secure them with a pin so that I know that they're nice and secure before taking them over to the machine. Now that we've sewn on each side of our drawn line, it is time to just give these a quick press to set those seams before taking them to the cutting mat and slicing them in half along our drawn line. We'll then take them back to the pressing mat and we'll press all of these towards the darker of the 2 fabrics, in my case that is the light blue, before trimming them down to our final required size. We now need to trim these down to the final required size of 4.5 inches, and you can do that with whatever your preferred method is. For me, I prefer to trim mine down 2 at a time using a square ruler, as the diagonal line on the square ruler comes in handy. We simply make sure that we've got that seam nice and snugly nested before taking our ruler and placing the diagonal of our ruler on our stitching line. We then make sure that we have enough fabric outside our required trim down measurement of 4.5 inches before trimming away the excess on the first 2 sides. We then rotate the block and place our ruler back on, making sure that our diagonal is once again lined up on our stitching line, and this time we can place the measurement of 4.5 on our freshly trimmed sides before trimming the final 2 sides. With our half square triangle units now made, we just need to lay this out as per the inset in the top left hand corner there to make our corner units. So this is where we'll grab our D and J squares and then ensure that we have our half square triangles pointing in the right directions. You'll then also see me go through and make sure that all my fabrics are up the right way before commencing 4-patch construction. With 4-patch construction, we first sew both of the vertical seams before doing the final horizontal seam along the middle there. In both instances, we'll press out towards the solid square before doing our horizontal seam. With our vertical seams now done, we just need to do this final horizontal seam. So lay them back out as per the pattern, and you'll find, because of the way we pressed, that this center seam here will nest nicely. So pin those together and sew your 1/4 inch on all 4 of these, and then we'll press these out and our 4 corner units will be done. With our horizontal seams now sewn, we just need to press these, and you could just press them in one direction, but what I'm actually doing is spinning that center seam just by removing the few stitches on either side of our seam line and then swirling that center to make it nice and flat. In this instance, it does actually go against the grain of our little half square triangles, but that's okay with me. As I said, you could just press these to one side. We'll now move on to making the square in a square, which is at the very center of our block for this week, and for that we require our fabrics B and E. I realize at some point that I only have one E square when I actually need 2, and you'll see me just now fast forward through while I quickly fix that situation up, and I'll meet you back and continue the instructions. Now that we do indeed have our 2 E-squares as required, I'm just going to give that a quick press because as you would have seen, it was a little bit crinkled, and I'm just going to place the other one on top of it and press it again, and that just helps the 2 fabrics stick together, because what we need to do now with our E-squares is cut them once on the diagonal. We're then going to place 2 of these on opposing sides of our B-square and sew our 1/4 inch. We'll need to line those up as best we can in the center, and to do that you'll see me fold both the half square triangle and the side of the B square that I'm putting it onto. We then just line up those 2 marks and we know that our triangle is in the center before taking it to the machine and sewing our 1/4 inch. You will also notice that I've put the half square triangle on the bottom, and that is because it has the bias edge, and when you've got one piece that has a bias edge, it's a good rule to follow that you put the bias on the bottom, and then the feed dogs take care of any stretch that may occur when sewing a piece that's on the bias. With our 2 half square triangles now sewn on the opposing sides, before we give those a press, I am just going to trim those little dog ears off, and that will keep everything nice and neat for when we attach our final 2 half square triangles. So line your ruler up as best you can with your B square on the bottom so that you're not trimming anything off that, and just trim those little dog ears off, and then we'll then press these away from the center, so towards the darker of the 2 fabrics. With that now done, we just need to repeat this process with our remaining 2 half square triangles on the other 2 opposing sides of our center square. So you'll see me here again finding the centers, lining that up, putting the bias on the bottom, sewing our 1/4 inch, and then pressing these out away from the center. It's now time to trim this center block down, and its final measurement needs to be 8.5, much like the centers of our Harrisonburg quilts. We need to trim this down, making sure that we have a 1/4 inch or so at each of our points, and that the square finishes at our 8.5 inches. First of all, I'm looking at my 2 dissecting diagonal lines here, and I'm placing them on the 2 sides so that I can ensure that I have a 1/4 inch away from that point. I think what I could do at this point is actually trim around all 3 sides there, but I'm not sure that that's what I do, so I'm recording the voiceover while we're looking at it. It looks like I'm thinking, I've got great concentration, but the question is my tongue sticking out the side of my mouth? You'll never know because you cannot see my face. Now I've moved this around again. What am I doing? Because this is an 8.5 inch wide ruler, I'm lining up the 4 1/4 mark on the 2 points there from the top and the bottom. I think what I'm going to do then is trim those 2 sides before rotating the block around and doing the same for the final 2 sides. Any method for doing this will work, but this is obviously the one that I went with on this day. With those two sides now done, I will once again line up my 4¼ inch mark on those 2 points and make sure that I maintain a straight edge on the 2 that I've just trimmed, and I'll trim these final 2 sides down. I think what this does is it leaves you at just over the 1/4 inch on all 4 of your points, but that's fine when we come to sew the final block together. It's time now to make the flying geese that go around the square in a square that we've just made, and for this we need our fabrics E and F. So as you would all know, I love the 4 at a time flying geese method, and we need 4, so that is the method I'm going to use here today. To do the 4 at a time flying geese method, we first take the 4 smaller squares, in this case the F squares, and draw a diagonal line in one direction on the back. For this one, I'm going to have to use my chalk liner, as my lead pencil would not show dark enough for me to be able to see. Once we've drawn this line on the back of all 4 of these squares, we will line 2 of them up diagonally across our larger square, maintaining that central line, and then we'll take that to the machine and we'll stitch a 1/4 inch on each side of our drawn line. With that now done, I'm just going to give this a quick press to set those seams before taking it to the cutting mat and slicing it in half along our drawn line. We'll then need to press the darker of our fabrics, in this case that dark blue, up away from the base triangle, and our shape will resemble a love heart or a cat's face. We'll then take the remaining 2 squares and place them again on our white background, with our diagonal line going from the top where the peaks are down to that corner of our white background fabric. We'll once again then sew a 1/4 inch on each side of this drawn line, and I'll meet you back at the cutting mat at that point. If you would like a more in-depth and not so fast tutorial on doing the 4 at a time flying geese method, I'm popping a link in the top right hand corner of your screen to my ultimate flying geese tutorial. With our final 2 seams now sewn, or stitching lines as it may be, we'll now just give this a quick press also to set those seams before once again cutting it in half on our drawn line. We'll then once again press our dark blue fabrics away from the background fabric, so out, and you will see that we then have 4 flying geese units which are ready to be trimmed down. Unlike the no waste 4 at a time flying geese method, these ones do need to be trimmed down, and I prefer that for accuracy. To do this, I use my ultimate flying geese tool from Creative Grids. The size that we're making here with a finished size of 4x8 is the maximum size that the ultimate flying geese tool can do. So we just grab our reference line, in this case it's H, and we place that inside the peak of our flying geese. We then trim those first 2 sides before rotating both the block and the tool, and once again lining up our H, which is the maximum on this tool, and trimming off those final 2 sides. You can also trim these flying geese down with a standard quilting ruler, and if you refer to my ultimate flying geese tutorial that I linked to before, in there you'll see how I do that. We'll just trim down all 4 of our flying geese. We're now going to move on to doing our sew and flip sections that go in the center of every side. So to begin, we're going to start with our 8H pieces, and we'll need to grab 16 of our D squares to do this. These are going to get a sew and flip on each end, but need to go in a very particular direction to get the final result. So for this, we'll count out our 4 that need to go in one direction and 4 for the other direction before beginning our right side. For the right side, we need to start with our H rectangle facing long side toward us and putting our sew and flip square in the corner, making sure that all of our edges are lining up nicely. For this tutorial, I am just doing it with the folded corner clipper tool from Creative Grids, and to do that we line that up on our measurement, making sure that everything is square before trimming our piece of fabric away. We then pin this to take it over to the machine because we're working with very large pieces, and we sew our 1/4 inch on all 4 of these in this orientation. We'll then press out towards the white triangle, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, as is bound to happen when you film the footage weeks ago but edit it at the last minute, it appears that I do the traditional sew and flip method as a learning opportunity for everyone. It's only fair, after all, that we learn how to do everything in every possible way. Well, not every possible way, because I don't know. So to do the traditional sew and flip, we actually draw a diagonal line on the background square from corner to corner in one direction only. We line it up the same way that we do for our folded corner clipper, making sure that all of our edges are even. We then take this to the machine, and I prefer to sew just to the right of our drawn line, and this allows for any fabric that will be taken up by the stitching line depending on the thickness of your quilting cotton. After we do that, we then trim that away at 1/4 inch before pressing it out, but we'll get to that as we get there within the video. As you saw during that little bit, I had to use a open toe foot for my sew and flip section and my 1/4 inch foot for the other 2. I still have one more to go, so we won't forget about that. But I just wanted to continue showing you the traditional sew and flip method. Once we've sewn that line, we fold this back to make sure that all of our edges are still even on the front, which means that they should definitely still be even on the back. If you are under or over, you may want to unstitch and try again, but I find just sewing just to the right of that line, it always ends up perfect. So now we press this into place before trimming away the back 2 layers, and we have a perfect sew and flip. I do believe now, but I am happy to be proven wrong, that I will be doing the rest with the folded corner clipper. Okay, we need to put the piece on the other side now to complete this right hand sew and flip section, and to do that we just repeat exactly the same steps that we did for our first one, having the piece horizontal in front of us, placing the piece on, doing our traditional method or using the folded corner clipper tool, and then pressing these out away from the blue in the middle. We now need to do the left-hand side of our sew and flips, and this is done in exactly the same way, except we have the fabric vertically in front of us instead of horizontally. And we'll do all 4 of these and then repeat the same to do the left and the right of the green. So throughout this section, as this video is getting very long, I will skip ahead a lot. But we basically just repeat the whole process, but just remember, make the first 4 having them horizontally on the table, and make the next 4 having them in a vertical position to start with, and repeat both for the other 8 to make the green left and right sew and flips also. There is just one change, sorry folks, with the blue section. When you're doing your left-hand ones, please press towards the blue fabric, and this will allow for nesting when we go to sew these 2 units together to create that V. Okay, with our left and right sections made of these blue ones for the central section, we need to sew those together. Now, all of these little off-cast bits that you see there, don't throw those away, because we're going to make those into half square triangles, and they will be used in future blocks of this sew-along. So keep those to the side. So because we press these in our opposing directions, we can nest both of these seams really nicely before sewing these together to create the center section of our outside round on the block. So we'll just pin all of these together and sew them with our 1/4 of an inch. And for these, we are going to press open. As I said before, we just now repeat the same process with our green or G rectangles and maintaining our left and right angles. In this instance, it's not important to press in different directions, so just press them all out towards the corner triangle. We now need to add these green sections to either side of our previously created V. And to do this, we need to take special care to line up our little crossover points there so that we get that continuous line. It doesn't matter if you miss, and you can do this in several different ways, but I always try and do what I call my sew and hope. So I just line it up, making sure that those little seam allowances overlap, because these ones are going in opposite directions. But if you make sure that the top and the bottom are lined up and use my sew and hope method, 9 times out of 10, everything works out perfect. So we'll add one of these to either side, as I said, and then we'll move forward. If you were paying attention throughout that part, you would have noticed that I sewed the first 3 without a bobbin. So with a quick replace of that bobbin, I got those 3 sides sewn on, and we'll now sew these green sections onto our other side. With those now both sewn on, we'll just simply press these out towards our green sections on both sides before moving on to constructing the very center star of our block. For the center star of our block, we'll have to grab our previously created flying geese sections, our previously created square in a square section, and 4 more of our D squares. We'll lay it out as per the inset in the top left hand corner there, and then sew this using a 9-patch construction, which means we'll sew all of our vertical seams and then our 2 horizontal seams. Care should be taken to line up your points here. And that is about all. So let's get this 9-patch star sewn. As I said before, we just need to take care when we're sewing these sections on to line up these points nice, as it will be noticeable being the center of such a large block. So there was no special pressing, and these are actually all pressed in the same direction at this point, so line it up the best you can, but don't worry if it's slightly off. It may be noticeable, it may not, but finished is better than perfect. So just line that up the best you can and sew your 1/4 of an inch, and on all of these ones that come into the points in the center, we will be pressing open. With all of our vertical seams now sewn, we just need to press all of these sections, and we're going to press out towards the corners on our flying geese units. And the center layer, as I said, we will press these open as it gets a bit bulky there on the points. You'll see throughout this section that I wasn't happy with how one of mine was lining up, so I quickly unstitch it and re-sew it. And even after redoing it, it still didn't line up as I would like, but I'm just going to leave it because in the big scheme of things, it's no big deal. Once again, now we're going to sew our horizontal seams, and we need to try and line up our points there as best we can, and then line up our other seams. Even though the ones underneath are pressed open, we can still line those up, and then sew our 2 horizontal seams, and we'll press these open as well. Once again, the beauty of editing and recording voiceovers way after you've actually done the block construction. It seems what I do here is clip either side of this central section and just press that part open, and all the other ones outside of my little clips I have just pressed in one direction. You'll also notice that when I was sewing my vertical seam that I flipped a few of the seams over. That is neither here nor there in the grand scheme of things. So just clip either side of your point, press that section over, but press all other sections out towards the side piece. With our center star now done, we will just simply attach two of our sew and flip sections on either side of this star. For the seam allowances to match up and nest nicely, I'm going to clip the ones on the sew and flip section and point them in my desired direction to make sure that that nests and we hit our points nice and neatly. So we'll just go ahead and pin both of these on and then sew these two seams before moving on to doing the top and the bottom row. Upon going to press this, I've clearly decided to spin these little intersections to control that bulk, and to do this we just simply remove the few stitches that are above our stitching line that we just made, and then just swirl those seams all in the same direction so that everything sits nice and flat. You'll see me do this again in a minute when I move it back into the middle of the screen. There we go. So we just move all of our seam allowances in this instance to all go in a clockwise direction, and we swirl that little center bit. I've got a few stubborn stitches in there, and press it nice and flat. We'll do the same thing to the other side, and in this way we can make sure that we have a very nice and flat intersection with all of those fabrics coming together. I'll fast forward through the rest of this now while I attach the other side and do the same with the swirling of these seams. Those two side sections now attached, it's time to move on to creating the top and the bottom row for this very large central block, so big in fact that it's not fitting in my little workspace. So to create those top and bottom rows, we simply need to take our corner sections that we created hours ago, it feels, and sew one to either side of our remaining sew and flip sections. We'll then sew these on in a vertical fashion to our central block. When doing this one, we already have everything we need to make sure that it lines up perfectly. We have where our half square triangle crosses over our solid square to give us our 1/4 inch mark, and we can line that up with the green sew and flip section underneath, and we will hit that point perfect. every single time. So sew our corners on to either side of our remaining 2 sew and flip sections, and then sew those 2 vertical seams onto our central block. And our video for today, as long as it's been, is almost done. I tried to think of the best way to press this in order to control the bulk at those points there, and in the end you'll see that I've just decided to press these ones open. Once we've pressed these 2 seams open, we'll attach these to that central block as I said before, and then I do believe I also press those seams open, but we'll see. When getting ready to sew this vertical seam, just match up all of your points the best you can, control the seam allowances in whichever way you like, and then sew that horizontal seam and attach both of these to either side. You'll see me throughout this section, even though it's fast, is I move a few of the seam allowances around and point them in the direction that I want them to go to make those points nest and to make sure that we get our nice points. I do believe at the end, once I've done this, I go through and clip all the ones that I change the direction of to make sure that they do indeed sit nice and flat. Do this and attach both of these remaining pieces to our central block. Thanks for joining me, everyone. It's great that you are here, and I really hope that you made it to the end. If you did, leave a comment for me to let me know that you got this far. It was a long one, but as you could see, all of the techniques and tricks within this video needed to be explained in depth. For the parts that I did scrub through, I do apologize, but it was the only way to make this video under an hour long. I had 3 hours of raw footage to play with. So once again, thanks for joining me again this week, folks, and I will see you all again next week. Bye for now.